What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Plenty to get to, starting, of course, with Manchester City Arsenal. Finally, Arsenal, Mikel Arteta, get the better of Pep Guardiola and Manchester City in a Premier League game. 1-0 the final score, deflected goal late off a shot from Martinelli, who comes on as a substitute. I do want to save that for a little bit and talk about the first half, though, because David Raya was brought in primarily because of what he can do with his feet, and the numbers back it up. What he did at Brentford, you just didn't see it in this game. And generally, I feel like that was kind of symbolic of Arsenal's first half. A lot of the players who hadn't been in this kind of situation with this kind of pressure on them did not look incredibly confident. And Raya in particular, 3 or 4 really bad decisions in distribution, almost turns into a couple City goals. There are those opportunities. Ake had one. The ball that I think it was Julian Alvarez nearly knocked into the net off of Raya's foot. There were opportunities here for Manchester City to get a goal in the first half. Not necessarily because City were playing all that well, but because Arsenal were just not looking like themselves and really not imposing their will at all on Manchester City. Very, very conservative, not a lot of high pressing in the first half. They really emphasized that in the commentary. That changed in the second half. Arsenal got a little bit more aggressive. They got back to what they did, and maybe that was the game plan all along from Mikel Arteta. And if it was, bravo, because it worked. I still generally lean toward do what you do, but it is Manchester City. You just can't sit back for 90 minutes against them. That's always my big thing. At some point, you got to take some initiative, and you got to try and hold on to the ball. 45, 60 minutes, you can play defensively. But you got to have moments in the game where you're on the front foot, where you're not just absorbing pressure for the entire 90. And that's exactly what Arsenal were able to do. Specifically in that second half, they probably had the better of the play, and ultimately they get the deflected goal. Not a phenomenal attacking performance by either team, by any stretch of the imagination. But there is something here, and I talked about this last season as well. In a game that Bukayo Saka was not available for, 4 Arsenal substitutes were involved in that goal in an important way. That went from sub to sub to sub to sub. You had Havertz and Tomiyasu, and Partey started the whole thing with the first ball. And then, of course, Martinelli finished it off with some help from the deflection. Again, game Bukayo Saka did not play in. You still had 4, and I know Martinelli is obviously a starter who is working his way back from injury. But you were able to bring those kind of players off the bench, and they came in and they delivered. Now, Kai Havertz didn't do much else besides get involved a little bit there. Still have major questions. It's not like he changed the conversation around him at all. But you got to have 15 to 18 guys that are able to step in and contribute. Because Bukayo Saka cannot play every single minute of every game because there are going to be injuries, suspensions, squad rotation now that you're in the Champions League. You need these guys to come in and produce, and Arsenal got that today. Massive win. What it means for the title race overall in this season is where I'm hesitant to draw any big conclusions. 1, because Arsenal were not all that impressive. 2, because Arsenal have not been all that impressive generally this season. 3, because, well, I'm just not going to overreact to City having a small deficit to overcome at the beginning of the season. Look at what they did last season. Perhaps most importantly, though, there is something that is not being talked about enough with this stretch of games for City, these 3 domestic losses in a row. You know who didn't play in any of them? Rodri. And this is where, I'll say it again here, I said it last season, I'm a big believer that if you're going to catch a Manchester City, a Bayern Munich, a PSG, You have to do it from ahead. You cannot let them build a 5, 8 point lead and then hope to catch them. That's where this game was really important for the Liverpools of the world, who dropped points but are still gaining on Manchester City this weekend. Of course, Arsenal just got 3 points ahead of Manchester City. You limit the maximum points City can get. That's why this is important to keep the title race close. Does it change anything about how I feel in terms of City being the clear favorite? No. In large part because Rodri was not playing in these games. He is that important. That was one of the biggest conclusions I came to out of all of this. And just City's recent struggles in general. You will not be able to convince me a team this good struggles this mightily for 3 consecutive games domestically. Of course, they had the Champions League win in there. That, by the way, Rodri played in. And Rodri isn't there for any of those games. And they have won every Premier League game and Champions League game Rodri has played in. And that is a coincidence. I just don't buy it for a second. I know correlation doesn't equal causation. And there are clearly some other issues too. I mean, Haaland was nowhere to be found in this game. That's going to happen sometimes because of who he is in the system City play. But to me, the biggest story coming out of all of this, outside of the fact that Arsenal took another step toward making this title race interesting, is that as deep as Manchester City are, and as many great players as they have, Rodri is the singular, maybe outside of Ederson to a certain extent, but in terms of field players, he is the single indispensable part of that team. Because they don't have somebody else to do what he does. I thought that guy would be Calvin Phillips, and Pep just doesn't seem to trust him. I'm the biggest Calvin Phillips defender you're going to find, the biggest Calvin Phillips fan. He hasn't been that player for Manchester City. I still think he can be, but he hasn't been given that opportunity. Instead, you got John Stones and Rico Lewis playing in there, as Rodri's replacements are next to Rodri. To me, a lot of this is that simple. I don't think the sky is falling. I still think City win the league. I'm not going to overreact to this. This is one of those Arsenal had to have it if we're going to make this interesting. Not this shifts the balance. And a lot of that has to do with Rodri. He is that important. You're going to have a hard time convincing me otherwise. Some other MLS news I want to get to here. First, Inter Miami officially eliminated from the playoffs with those 2 defeats this week, both midweek and then over the weekend. I said from the beginning this was going to be a really tall task. I warmed to the possibility they could do it. Messi gets hurt. They were still hanging in there. But it was a situation where it was, I think they can do enough to stay in the conversation until Messi gets back. And then maybe you go win your final 3 games, and it's enough to sneak in. Then they proceeded to lose 2 in a row in the span of days. And, Messi came back at the end of this last one, but it was too late. They couldn't drop the points against Chicago that they did midweek. And this was always going to be a Herculean task. They were not going to run through this league the way that the conversation was kind of trending coming out of Leagues Cup, which is why I was so adamant about that. It is a different situation playing a knockout tournament when Messi has just arrived and he's fresh and motivated than it is trying to make up all of this ground while navigating an international break, the fact Messi's not going to play every game, the fact that the squad still isn't where Tata Martino wants it to be, and that it's a Leagues Cup is this new tournament. Some teams were more invested than others. You just can't go take Leagues Cup and then say that's the team that's going to show up in MLS every week. Because Messi's not playing every minute of every game. They still, even though it only resulted in 1 trophy, and it easily could have been 2, they made the right call not running everybody into the ground trying to make the playoffs. I firmly believe that. They paid a price for it. They're not playing in the playoffs. But the bigger point is this. In the MLS regular season games, so not including Leagues Cup, Messi appeared in, they are averaging 2 points per game. Since Messi's arrival in MLS regular season games, both the ones he played in and the ones he didn't, they are averaging 1.5. So you put those together and you're talking probably about somewhere in the 1.75 points per game range. That's near the top of the league. With Messi, and again, 2 of those were substitute appearances. That's right there with FC Cincinnati, and that's Supporters' Shield contention. This team is going to be awfully good in 2024 with a clean slate. I, from the beginning, basically said I expect this to look like it's looked. And it's evolved a little bit because they are better than I thought, to be completely honest. But they were never going to torch everybody every single week. And Messi's not playing every minute of every game. But you better believe they're right up there with the favorites and a Supporters' Shield contender next season. Absolutely. The question is going to be, does Messi play closer to 28, 30 games? Or are we talking closer to 20? Does he just come on as does he make 32 appearances and start 25 where he's a factor in most of the games? What do they do without him? But 1.5 points per game with Messi in and out and injured is a very, very good return. And if you get Messi for most of the season, you're talking more like 1.75, 1.8 points per game. That puts you near the top of the league. That makes you one of the best teams in MLS. You couldn't have asked for anything more from this season if you're into Miami. You got a trophy, and it is very clear they are coming in 2024. This is what you should expect. They're not going to be perfect. They are not head and shoulders above everybody else. But give Tata Martino another transfer window, Messi some time to recoup and refresh. They're going to be awfully good next season. Other news, we got 2 coaching changes in MLS I want to touch on quickly. Adrian Heath dismissed by Minnesota United. Very bizarre to do it this late in the season. But this is what happens in Major League Soccer, where so many teams are able to make the playoffs that almost every single team in the league with 2 games left is still in playoff contention. You have the one side of the coin, which is it is very hard for teams to fire coaches that make the playoffs. So therefore you have this kind of extra job security that there's no pressure of relegation. The stakes aren't that high. If a club believes in you, you're probably going to be safe. But the flip side to that is just about every team in the league can talk themselves also into if we make a change and we get that new manager bounce, that could get us into the playoffs. That could get us rolling. Look at what's happening in Portland, for example, where the Timbers have all of a sudden turned into a very dangerous team since dismissing a coach I really like in Giovanni Savarese. It was not working with Adrian Heath. There is a very, very strong case, if you look at that their best opportunity to make the playoffs was to go in a different direction, get a new voice in there. It results in a 5-2 win over the LA Galaxy, and so here they are, 1 game left. Plenty to do to make the playoffs, but they're still in contention. That's really what I want to highlight here. Is this is a very, very MLS-specific situation. But this is what happens when you just don't prioritize the regular season as a league. And you let everybody into the playoffs. If they weren't going to make the playoffs, they're not making this change right now. They'll reevaluate in the summer, and maybe they go different directions because this team should be in a better spot. And maybe that relationship would just run its course. But you don't see this in other leagues because the last 2 games of the season, generally speaking, don't matter. Or if they do, those teams are already facing relegation and have probably already made their coaching change. Right? Some teams in the Premier League, for example, try and do it with 10, 15 games left, not 2. But it might just save Minnesota United's playoff hopes. That is the reality of MLS, whether anybody likes it or not. It's the flip side to this coin, that it's really easy to sell, we made the playoffs. It's also really easy to sell from a club perspective. That little boost, that new manager bounce, if you believe in that, could be the difference between us making the playoffs or not. That's the direction Minnesota decided to go, and I believed when they made the call, that's probably the best decision they could have made, and that first game certainly validated it. Also, Wayne Rooney, in the strange scheduling of MLS and the weird distribution of teams, DC United have completed their season. And so Wayne Rooney has decided to part ways. I do feel like this was really a mutual consent that he decided to go back. DC said, we're fine heading in a different direction. I will continue to say I really like Wayne Rooney as a manager. I was impressed what he did at DC United. I thought they were really, really fun to watch at times. They're an average team with an average roster. He didn't really overachieve. I don't feel like he underachieved. He just kind of got what you would expect out of that team. There was progress. I will continue to argue that. Especially where he inherited them and where they are now. I know it really fell off the second half of the season, where it looked like they were potentially pushing for that 5, 6, 7 in the East, and then it turned into, can they find a way to make the playoffs? And they've been eliminated. But I'm still going to bat for Wayne Rooney. To me, this is more of a story of DC United not investing the way they need to, and Wayne Rooney looking at it and saying, I'm not sticking around for this kind of investment. And I don't blame him. There should be consequences for not putting the money into a team to build one of the best teams in the league. People like Wayne Rooney should expect, and maybe not expect, that's probably not the right word, but should be looking for more. I want the ambitious manager who believes in what he is doing, he or she, and says, I need the backing to get to where I want to be. I'm very curious where he goes next. To me, if you're a championship club off to a bad start, 100% offer him that job right away. I still, of all of these big names that have become managers lately, the Gerrards, the Lampards, I really feel like Wayne Rooney is not getting the credit he deserves for the job he's done overall. Obviously, it wasn't what he hoped at DC United. I do think he did some good things. Ultimately, it just wasn't enough for a variety of reasons. Some of them maybe on him a little bit, but also some of them were things that I would argue were outside of his control. But Wayne Rooney gone from DC United. Adrian Heath out at Minnesota United. That is all for the weekend roundup. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.